Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea confirms more than 50 new cases of COVID-19 concentrated in the Seoul area. That prompts the government to extend its prevention guidelines in the capital, which were supposed to end this Sunday. 2 years on from the historic summit between North Korea's Kim Jong-un and President Trump, Pyongyang says ties between the two sides have only gotten worse. So now it's going to focus on strengthening its military. And though there are still cases of COVID-19, South Korea's water parks are opening back up. Lots of precautions in place to make sure people can enjoy the water safely. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The number of newly confirmed COVID-19 cases in South Korea jumped back into the 50s today. Most of them are in the greater Seoul area, prompting the government to extend its virus prevention guidelines in the capital indefinitely. Kim Sung-min reports.
The South Korean government announced on Friday it would extend its COVID-19 prevention guidelines for the Seoul metropolitan area after a series of cluster infections in the capital region. The measure was initially set to come to an end this Sunday, but now it has been extended indefinitely.
There is no end date to this, and it will remain until the new confirmed cases are in the single digits.
The measure comes as around 96% of local infections over the past 2 weeks came from the capital area. The government will expand its definition of high-risk facilities to include more places other than the 8 types of facilities already following extra measures. It would also take stricter legal action against businesses that don't follow the law. QR codes or quick response codes will become mandatory for private education facilities and internet cafes to keep track of visitors at high-risk facilities. But the government has decided not to go back to stronger social distancing measures like preventing students from going to school, as those stronger measures could harm children's education and people's livelihoods. The Education Ministry also aligned its policies with the government by extending until June 30th its limit that caps schools in the capital area at 1/3 capacity. On Friday, South Korea reported 56 new COVID-19 cases, of which 43 were community transmissions. There was 1 new death, bringing the death toll to 277. Now, the total number of cases in South Korea stands at 12,003. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
It's been 2 years since the summit in Singapore when the leaders of the U.S. and North Korea met for the first time. And on that anniversary, the North Korean regime said the two sides' relationship has only gotten worse since then. Its foreign minister said North Korea's goal now will be to strengthen its military against what it sees as the U.S. threat. Hong Yu reports.
North Korea announced on Friday that it will develop more reliable military forces to counter U.S. military threats. In a statement marking the second anniversary of the Singapore summit, the first ever summit between the leaders of the U.S. and North Korea, the regime's foreign minister Lee Sun-kwon said that over the last 2 years, the U.S. has only made their relationship worse. And he warned that the North would never again provide another package for President Trump to boast as his accomplishment. Lee laid out the measures that Pyongyang had taken after the Singapore summit, such as demolishing its nuclear test site at Punggye and halting nuclear tests and the launching of long-range missiles, calling it the decision of the century. He then said that the U.S. has only escalated tensions on the Korean peninsula by stationing weapons such as aircraft carriers around the area. However, a U.S. State Department official said on Thursday that Washington is willing to take a flexible approach to reach a balanced agreement. The official added that the offer of meaningful negotiations with the North is still on the table. The North's Foreign Affairs Ministry also slammed comments by a UN spokesperson who said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed regret over Pyongyang's decision to cut inter-Korean hotlines. The North state-run Korean Central News Agency reported that its Foreign Affairs Ministry was astonished about what they called reckless remarks by the UN. The ministry added that such remarks cannot be overlooked and accused Guterres of siding with the United States, saying he expressed inappropriate and biased views. The UN declined to comment on North Korea's statement. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
The South Korean province of Gyeonggi-do is going to designate specific areas near the border with North Korea as off-limits danger zones to block any attempts to send propaganda leaflets into the north. The Gyeonggi-do Vice Governor for Peace, Lee Jae-gang, said Friday that his province will mobilize all possible means to protect the lives and safety of its residents. The authorities will designate 4 cities and counties, namely Gimpo, Goyang, Paju, and Yeoncheon, as off-limits to suspected leaflet senders, that is. They'll keep close tabs on any vehicles near the border and mobilize the police to crack down on and investigate anyone attempting to send leaflets. The South Korean government says the date and location of the highly anticipated launch of its first military communications satellite have not yet been set. That's contrary to U.S. media reports, which cite industry sources as saying that the satellite, dubbed Anasis-2, could lift off next month on a Falcon 9 rocket launched by SpaceX, the commercial space firm. But South Korea's Defense Acquisition Program Administration said Friday that the details of the launch will depend on many factors, including the weather. The Anasis-2 is expected to provide more secure communications and wider coverage compared to civilian-owned satellites, which the South Korean military currently relies on for communications. South Korea's finance ministry has given a slightly more positive assessment of the local economy compared to last month. The ministry's monthly Green Book, released Friday, says that while the COVID-19 outbreak continues to pose uncertainties, the decline in domestic consumption is showing signs of easing, and the pace of job losses has slowed in May. This assessment is brighter than last month's evaluation, which said downside risks from COVID-19 were growing. But the ministry warned concerns linger over a global economic recession with risk factors in emerging economies. More than 860 South Korean workers and their families have been granted exceptions so they can enter Vietnam. This is the first time that the Vietnamese government, which has been banning the entry of foreigners because of the coronavirus, has allowed the families of workers to come along as well. 200 people made their way to Vietnam earlier this week. 300 are to leave tomorrow, and the rest are to leave next week. Since March, Vietnam's granted such exceptions to almost 3,500 South Korean workers and students. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you as always for coming on.
Thank you for having me today.
So a pretty stunning turnaround on Wall Street overnight, the Dow plunging almost 7%, the biggest decline since March. Some of the states reopening are seeing a surge in coronavirus cases. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, it seems that it's repeating what happened in March of this year, and quite a lot of investors are scared about the drop that we saw in U.S. market. As you said, the Wall Street plummeted on Thursday, suffering the worst trading session since March, as the hopes for the fast economic recovery faded away as the Fed Chair Powell painted a gloomy outlook going forward whether the U.S. economy can recover quickly. Also, the second wave of COVID cases in several states triggered the fears about the reopening efforts done by U.S. The Texas reported 3 consecutive days of record-breaking hospitalizations, which is a big concern. And also Florida and various other states were talking about a new infection coming in a big number. Meanwhile, the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, said that we cannot shut down the economy again. And he also added that he's preparing to return to the Congress to request additional fiscal spending to stimulate the economy. So clearly there is a concern about the COVID-19 versus a continuation of injections and boosting measures done by the government. It seems that the market seems to be taking a bit of a breather after such a crash yesterday, as the futures market, the U.S. S&P is up about 1.3% and NASDAQ futures up about 1.2%.
Yeah, there were declines here in Korea, too, starting out this morning down around 4%, but recovering a lot of that. Tell us about the Korean markets.
Yes, as you said, Kospi index tumbled at the beginning by 89 points or 4.1% at the open. following the huge drop in the Wall Street overnight. Clearly the mounting fears over the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic in U.S. is putting pressure on the Korean market as well, as the quick economic recovery for the country, for Korea, is a question mark at this point in time. However, though, government as well as the Bank of Korea have said that they will keep pumping stimulus to the economy and deploy the policy tools to make sure that the economy recovers in the future. In terms of how I look at the Korean equity market, we think that the economic recovery can come through, and the numbers should be better than most of the other countries due to very strong the economy in regards to the IT sector, as well as the fourth industrial revolution related sectors. Also, we are seeing a massive liquidity injection by the domestic investors into the Korean equity market, resulting into quite a resilience of the overall equity market. And also, if you look at Korea, there's potential for re-rating story as the corporate governance issue improves. So all in all, yes, Korean market has declined by quite sharply today, by around 2% for KOSPI and about 1.5% for KOSDAQ. But nevertheless, the level of decline, it seems to be reasonably okay. And also going into the future, people are expecting more liquidity to boost up the equity market going forward.
Well, now the exchange rate has come down a lot in the past week or so. The dollar to the Korean won, it's below the 1,200 mark for a couple of days there, but ticking up a bit today. What's happening with the Korean currency?
Yes, surprisingly, if you look at the Korean won, it went from 1,250 range to all the way down to below 1,200. Clearly, this is because we have seen dollar index falling by about 4% from its peak, around 100 index to as low as 96 below. However, though, with this kind of concern about COVID-19, people were basically flight to safety actually occurred, and therefore the dollar kind of appreciated a bit, and also Korean won depreciated a bit. However, though, it seems that the continuation of commitment done by the various countries is there, and therefore we think that the Korean won should not be weakening that quickly. We think the range bound anywhere between 1190 to 1220 should be reasonable range bound. It seems that the dollar index also seems to be depreciating a bit of today. It is down to about 96.6, and therefore we think that Korean won can have a bit more room to appreciate in the future. And if that's the case, then foreign investors should be coming back to the Korean equity market. And if we look at the foreign investors trend, they're not really major net seller of the equity market, as they're actually a big buyer of the KOSDAQ market today.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, thanks so much for sharing your insights today, and have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you very much.
Now, it's been delayed by about 2 months, but South Korea's water parks are reopening, albeit gradually. In years past, they would have seen 10,000 visitors a day, but now they're getting only a few hundred. Choi Jung-yoon has this report.
The start of a sizzling summer has once again brought people to South Korea's biggest water park.
It was really boring and stuffy inside. Now it's really hot. I came with my sisters to play and enjoy summer.
However, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, cooling off is more complicated. Using a QR system, visitors fill out their personal details, whether they visited any infected area within the past 2 weeks, and list any potential symptoms. Standing 2 meters apart, they have their temperatures taken as they enter. If they're over 37.5 degrees Celsius, they're not allowed in.
Once visitors are inside the park, they must wear face masks at all times, apart from when they're in the water. When taking a dip, visitors are advised to take their masks in this plastic bag that's provided at the front gate to stop the mask from getting wet.
Wet masks make breathing difficult, so with no masks in the pool, we advise social distancing.
Riding water slides is also different. All tubes are thoroughly disinfected before being handed out. Also, a tube they used to take up to 6 people is now limited to 3 people sitting further apart. However, one question remains.
Can the virus spread in water from the saliva of an infected person?
The probability is very low. Pools contain chlorine. When mixed with water, the density is sharply lowered and the risk of spread is greatly reduced.
Infections are most likely to occur in enclosed and crowded environments like locker rooms. The park emptied out all publicly shared materials, and lockers are spaced out. Only 1 in 5 of the top ones are available to ensure visitors remain at least 2 meters apart. In addition, the park's capacity has been reduced from 20,000 to 1,000 people. 최정윤, 아리랑 뉴스.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.